In one of your articles, you thanked Jim Jordan for investigating the IRS, visiting your house, and he did a broad investigation that's actually led to a reform that they're not going to do that anymore. And you closed out the article saying, I gave votes to the editorial note Democratic Party for 30 years. Which elected Democrat would have performed basic constituent services in my case? Feel free to raise a hand. If silence is the answer, why should I ever vote for a Democrat again? And in another article, you quoted your podcast co host Walter Kern regarding Democrats saying, stopping them electorally is probably the only way forward. So, what are you trying to tell us, Matt? Are you post-duopoly, or do you have an announcement to make on the show about your party affiliation?
I mean,
you don't have any bright red Adidas hats that you can wear to these interviews?
I have a full red Adidas hat. But it's a tough pill to swallow. But they got. I think even that hearing this week, though, was kind of an epiphany for me, because Schellenberger and I, going into the hearing, we had strategized. What are we trying to accomplish with this? And one of the things that we've been trying to do is, reach out to people who were erstwhile Democratic voters and try to convince them that this issue should matter to them and why it should matter to them. And so I spent a lot of time trying to formulate arguments about why this is really a class thing. Not only is it going to affect issues like, Palestinian activism or healthcare for all or whatever, take your pick. There were lots of other things that we found in both the Twitter files and the CTI files that were aimed at the left as well. But, in the course of the last year or so, it's become abundantly clear to me that the Democratic Party is just fundamentally intertwined with this project, that this is their project. The Republicans are really outsiders in this thing, in ways that they weren't during the War on Terror years. If Dick Cheney was the leading proponent of programs like extraordinary rendition, torture, enhanced interrogation, all that stuff, the mainstream Republican Party basically needs to, get an invitation to even sit at the table at the discussions for things like the Global Engagement Center, the CISA, the programs that they're trying to institute. There are no Republicans involved in any of these projects, not that I've been able to see. And you can see it at this hearing that there are no Democrats standing up and arguing this issue, or even trying to tell you why they think it matters, because this is them, right? Like when you're talking about this issue, you're talking about something that's just fundamental to their entire brand of politics now. So they're going to have to be beaten at the polls. I don't know if it'd be very tough for me to imagine voting for Donald Trump, but I've already decided that at the very least I'm going to be voting for somebody like West or Kennedy. I mean, it's going to have to be something like that. But they can't win. They got to suffer a loss over this stuff, because this stuff is incredibly dangerous, and it's not just about speech; it's about politics. That's the thing that's so scary about it. And if the next step happens and you have like an Americans style version of the Digital Services Act, then it's just 1984 territory from there. So. I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, can you explain for our viewers what the Digital Services Act is?
So this is the EU's big speech regulation. It's a regulation of the internet that was passed last year. It's a gigantic regulatory framework, and it has basically a system wherein private platforms like X, Twitter, or Facebook, or Google have to partner up with these people who are called trusted flaggers. And these are credentialed sort of news readers designated by the European Union. And they are, they're number in the thousands. And basically, if the companies do not abide by the recommendations of the EU's trusted flaggers, if they allow too much of X kind of speech or Y kind of speech or whatever, then they suffer basically crippling financial penalties. You're going to see this play out with Twitter soon, because Elon so far has refused to do it. Essentially, this is just censorship, right? It's basically saying if you don't go along with these recommendations, you're going to pay fines that will put you out of business. That's the model, and it's already, because these companies are global, it already has a huge impact on what you can see, even about something like Gaza, right, or the other side of Ukraine war. I mean, where do you go to look to find out what's actually happening in Ukraine? There's nowhere to look, right? And that's not an accident. So they've been, there are a couple of laws. There's the Restrict Act was the first attempt to really draw up what that legislation would look like in America, but they don't really even need it. All they would need is just more things like that in other parts of the world, and these companies will just do that work on their own. But I do think they're eventually going to try to pass something like that here.
Yeah, I mean, you asked, what do we think the solution is? And I think the answer lies in examining kind of how the Republicans became outsiders in this whole process, in this whole regulation of speech process and project. And I think they were forced into it by the base. I mean, they wanted to box Trump out of that primary in 2016. But there was a populist revolt within the party, and the base of the party literally dragged them into not necessarily, as we articulated earlier, this very principled civil liberties stand, but they got sort of Steve Bannonized into it, right? The dismantling of the administrative state, as he would call it, right? Just a suspicion of concentrated power. A rejection of top-down control over the day-to-day lives of ordinary people. And with that came sort of an implicit rejection of a lot of the Bush-era posturing of the GOP. The problem, of course, as you mentioned, is that the Democrats made and continue to make such a populist revolt within their party impossible. They have put in place structural barriers that literally wall that off. They just canceled the Florida Democratic primary. Canceled it. No vote. Right? They put Biden on the ballot. They wouldn't put anybody else on the ballot. That's it. So that makes the Democratic Party a closed door. That's what Russell and I have been saying for now, the past few years. West, sure, if he could get on a ballot, that'd be nice. He voluntarily took himself off of 17 state ballots when he switched from Green to Independent. RFK, I mean, I couldn't go into a voting booth and pull the lever for RFK, given the things that he's said and signaled he'll do as regard to this conflict.
Hillary Clinton, so I mean,
what's that?
I voted for Hillary Clinton, so my tolerance for voting for. I'm sorry.
I got you. I'm just saying, like, in terms of
fair enough.
In terms of okay, who are we gonna vote for? Who are we gonna vote for? I've punted. I'm not going to rack my brains and worry about it now. I'm not excited about anybody. This is a hopeless election. That's why the Free Palestine protests are inspiring to me, because I see some activism. I see real pressure being exerted on the system, and out of that must come something, because that's really the only hope I see right now.
Yeah. I was hoping that, maybe there will be a meeting of the minds, right, where the Free Palestine activists will sort of make some kind of a bridge with other populist movements and realize that ultimately, at the heart of this thing there's militarism and authoritarianism. That's the common theme. I think a lot of different factions are going to end up realizing that they have a common enemy, right? And I think enemy is the wrong word, but
no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, sure.
I think it's fair enough. Yeah.
I think that's the right word.
Yeah.
The frustration for me, though, is just, okay, Gaza, Palestine, I understand that's an animating issue for a lot of people, but this thing that's happening in the United States, this sort of building of this intelligence surveillance state, it is a long developing story that goes back 20 years now. Even things like the sort of subtle rollbacks of the church committee reforms, right? So after the 70s, the FBI used to have a reason to open a file on you. They used to have to have a reason to investigate you, to surveil you. They stopped doing that, right? And those FBI whistleblowers who came out last year, I interviewed some of those guys, and they would talk about how, like there are FBI offices where half the agents are not doing work that goes to a case, and they just sit there gathering information. Or as one guy put it to me, they'll just post up outside houses, right? They'll just sit there in vans watching people. That is massively fucked up. Gaza aside, you have to realize that they're building something here in the U.S. right now that is terrifying, is going to last beyond whatever happens over there in Israel. And I think a lot of people just don't know about it because this issue has been so successfully kept under wraps. I'm not making a very good case for this, but it's just been very frustrating to watch because they've successfully coded all this as a right-only thing, and all the people who seem to care about this in the Bush years are suddenly gone, and
yes,
them, and that's what's frustrating.
Well, yeah, that's I think is the most frustrating part about it. Anyway, I got some video to play, but Russell, did you want to say something first?
Well, they've played on the class snobbery of what was the old Rockefeller Republican base in order to get them to basically swallow anything as long as it's framed as an attack on those people.
Right.
It's those people. Well, I saw somebody share a meme today, and I've seen this before, but it's somebody I know is like a wealthy, successful Hollywood type. This guy with, showing a yacht convinced this guy, and it shows a guy in the plaid shirt, that this guy is the cause of his problems, and it shows migrants picking, fruit. Well, how about liberals convince themselves that they didn't abuse this guy to such an extreme that now they want to blow up the entire system, like that. They will never examine it that way. And it seems, and I'm going to get into this because lately in both your congressional testimony and in your article about, I always want to say CLIT, where they C-T-I-L.
Never thought about that. Wow.
You should have figured out a way to name it CLIT. It would have gotten a lot of eyeballs. You're frustrated this isn't getting enough attention. Maybe you should try coming up with some catchier acronyms.
Penetrating the mystery of the CLIT style.
Yeah, there you go. That'll get some Substackers pouring in.
Right.
But you've been focusing in on that class dimension, which we'll be getting into, which I agree with.
Please clap.